All right, here we go with episode 94 of Return to Authenticity, and this week's guest, Nic McKinley. Woo, this was an intense conversation with a really intense dude. Nic is a very intense individual. He grew up in Montana and then went into the Air Force and became a pararescueman. So that's basically they call PJs, so pararescue jumper. That is the special operations community of the Air Force. He talks a bit about that. After over a decade in that role, he steps out of that and goes to work for the CIA and brings this operational experience to the CIA in an operational role, and does 30 deployments with the CIA in this, combined, I guess, with special operations and the CIA, over 30 deployments. So tremendous amount of on-the-ground experience. And then in the CIA role, he starts to see the power of technology in fighting the global war on terror. When he comes out, he looks to take all that skill, all that training, all that knowledge, and deploy it in the private sector. And he founds in 2014 the DeliverFund, which is a donor-funded program or group that's designed and mission is to fight human trafficking. So he takes all this knowledge that he's got and this technology is then provided to law enforcement to help them take down human traffickers, hook up the bad guys. What an incredible mission that he is on. And man, I would not want to be in the crosshairs of Nic McKinley, because this dude is he's a bad dude. And a really, really good man. So this was a fun conversation. I mentioned in the intro that he's got this nickname of being the real Jack Ryan, and he kind of laughs that off. But if there's ever a guy that was a Jason Bourne or Jack Ryan type of dude, it's Nic. So a really fun conversation, and a guy that's doing tremendous work, has done and is doing tremendous work in this world, and someone to pay attention to and potentially get connected with, support DeliverFund, as they are doing tremendous work. So a great conversation with a great American, and I think you're going to love this one. Episode 94 and Nic McKinley. Welcome to the Return to Authenticity podcast, where we hear inspiring and courageous stories of people who made bold pivots in their lives toward their more authentic selves, that version of themselves they were born to be, or they had to find after life threw them a major curveball. I'm your host, Eric Sardina. Welcome and stand by. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today's guest is Nic McKinley. Nic grew up in Montana and joined the U.S. military special operations as a U.S. Air Force pararescueman. After more than a decade in pararescue, Nic worked in private intelligence startups before being recruited into a specialized unit at the Central Intelligence Agency that provided unique capabilities and expertise in response to the critical operational needs of the intelligence community. His combined 30 deployments in both special operations and the CIA allowed Nic to experience the power of technology during the global war on terror. He then set out to use his skills, training, and experience to combat modern slavery. And in 2014, Nic founded DeliverFund, the only donor-funded solution to human trafficking that delivers proprietary data and technology to law enforcement, allowing them to take down human traffickers effectively. I'm excited to have Nic, dubbed the real Jack Ryan by Vice Media, on the show today to share how this tech entrepreneur and pioneer is building technical solutions to protect society from predators. And with that, Nic McKinley, welcome to the show.
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me here.
Man, thrilled to have you, man. This your background and bio does read like a novel, so I'm excited, a little geeked out, a little nerded out by all the things you got in your background. I'm excited to let you tell your story and get it out for our listeners to be able to enjoy. And I know there's probably some dark corners to it, so but important story to be told. So I appreciate you taking time to do that.
Well, thanks for having me. I think you'll find I'm a whole lot more like Forrest Gump than Jason Bourne, but you know, thanks for the kind words.
Maybe a little of both. Who knows, right? Maybe we'll find out. Maybe a little both. So cool. So I know we talked before hitting record that you're in Montana and you grew up in Montana. So talk about what life was like growing up in Montana for you, and what was your family life, and kind of what that situation looked like.
So I ended up in Montana in a pretty nonlinear route. I actually was orphaned in the central United States and then was put into a closed, I guess, adoption process. And so where you basically get taken to another state and put into foster care and orphanages and things like that. And so I ended up in Wyoming and then ended up being adopted by an amazing family that then took me to Montana. And so that's how I ended up in
Wow.
Montana. And when you grow up in a small rural community, even though Billings, Montana, which is where I grew up, is the largest town in Montana. It is very much a town. It's not
Yeah.
even remotely close to a city. I think where I lived in most of my life, there were more people who lived in the immediate area, call it 10 miles of where I lived, than there are in the entire state of Montana. So in some ways, there's a lot of limitations growing up in a place like Montana, but in other ways, there's a lot of blessings and a lot of benefits. And I think the blessings and the benefits very much outweigh the negatives. However, you don't know that when you're a teenager. And so when
Right.
I was 18, I left to join the Air Force to be an Air Force pararescueman. By the complete grace of God, managed to make it through that selection process and do that for a number of years, and then kind of the rest is history.
Right on. So a few questions. So you were orphaned in Central America? So you're
No, in the central United
Central
States.
United States. I missed that. I'm sorry.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So you're orphaned. So your parents passed away or
No, literally
abandoned,
just abandoned me on
abandoned you?
the steps of an orphanage.
Wow. And
Yeah.
as a baby, you were a baby.
I was I believe I was around 18 months, give or
Okay.
take,
So
a
no
couple months.
knowledge.
Obviously, I don't really remember anything, at least in my conscious mind, I don't really remember
Sure.
anything, but that's what I've been able to kind of deduce and put together. And then I was adopted when I was 3, so about very very blessed to only have about a year and a half, maybe a little bit more or less. I
Mm,
don't really have hard information on this, but roughly about a year and a half in the foster care
foster
and
care.
kind of orphan system.
Yes. Do you ever, have you ever tracked down or do you know your biological family at all?
I don't.
Yeah.
Really haven't. I mean, I obviously could track
Yeah.
them down. I'm pretty darn good at that kind of stuff, but never have really had a desire to.
Yeah. Okay. Any, so the foster system to me is always somewhat interesting because, number one, I have some friends that have fostered children and they're unbelievable heart that they have for that. And so on the surface, I always think it's unbelievable people that get involved with foster care to provide this, these homes for children that need homes. And yet you hear about some negative stories come out of that as well, of
Mm.
abuse and things like that go on. Any takeaways in general of the foster? Not necessarily from you were very very young when you went into a home and out of the foster system, but just your own knowledge of it. Maybe now as an adult, do you have any take or perspective on foster care?
I don't. I think that it's like anything. Anytime you have people involved, you're going to have a population distribution curve,
Right.
and you're going to have good people and bad people, and then kind of the people in the middle.
Yeah.
And there's not enough people standing up to be foster parents for any number of reasons, and and there's also not enough people adopting kids who are in
Yes.
foster care, and so I don't you know, I think that the system works as best it can
Mm.
right now. It's obviously a very under-resourced system. We in this country, I think, tend to complain about things like child protection services
Mm.
and the foster system and all that. But then, anytime a politician wants to, maybe raise our taxes by $10 a year so that we can pay for those types of systems, we vote it down.
Right.
So I think we obviously need to resource those systems better. However, I don't really have an opinion on how they work today because I haven't really been involved with them.
Got it. Okay. Um, Let's talk a little bit about Montana, because I came to know Montana later in life as a younger person, right? Never really was on the radar. Like, I need to go to Montana. But then I started to listen, and we were talking about podcasts earlier before recording. Love podcasts, and one of my favorite shows is a show called Cleared Hot with Andy Stumpf. And so, and he I started listening to it, I think pretty early on when he started putting episodes out, and he would talk a lot about the Flathead Valley, the Flathead Valley, the Flathead Valley. I'm like, where in the world is the Flathead Valley? And he would talk about how gorgeous it was. And I started looking it up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea this was out there. And so I started telling my wife, we're going to go summer vacation. We're in Texas, so we love going to the mountains and get out of the heat in the summer. And so I'm like, rather than go to New Mexico or Colorado, we're going to go to Montana. And she's like, no, we're not. Like, why would we go to Montana? And so I was like, we have to go to Montana. And so we ended up going to Glacier National Park, and we flew into the airport, not Kalispell, the one that's just south of the Flathead. It's just like it's 2 hours from the park south. It's a small airport. Maybe it's Kalispell. I can't think of it, but it's basically, we drove up all along Flathead Lake to get to the park, and it was just 2 hours.
So you probably flew in to Missoula.
Maybe it was Missoula. Yeah. And it was the most breathtaking, beautiful drive. I'm like, I'm so glad we did this, because it took us 2 hours of just taking in this whole area. Fabulous country, unbelievable. Now, it did strike me that it's probably really, really cold in the winter, given its proximity to Canada. But it just was like just breathtakingly beautiful. And so we've been back now a couple times, and have spent time in that same kind of area of Montana. I know it's very different when you go to the flatter areas, the deserty areas, very different than the mountainy areas. But man, gorgeous place, and I can't imagine what it was like to grow up. Did you grow up kind of hunting and fishing, being out in nature, running around out there, or what was that like?
Yeah, I did. So growing up in Billings is really kind of the central, kind of the you could call it the gateway to the eastern side of Montana, which is pretty flat and has no trees and tons of wind. Yeah. Much colder than it is here. So I live in the Flathead Valley. Andy's friend lives, about I want to say 15 miles south of me. Cool. It's one of the things that, I've been on the Cleared Hot podcast a couple of times, and we talk about is just the amazing area that we're blessed to be able to not only live in, but raise our kids in. I mean, this place is absolute utopia, right? Yeah. The crime is virtually non-existent. Yeah. It's so low, they don't even really keep stats on it. The school systems are amazing. The private schools are amazing. The economy is doing really well. And what a lot of people don't realize is how strong the technical infrastructure is up here. I mean, up here, you can get better internet than you could in, say, downtown New York City. I'm sitting in an office in Whitefish, and I've got a 5 gig fiber connection coming into the office, which is probably shared by maybe 20 people total in this building. I've got a 1 gig fiber connection that goes into my house. I mean, this place, Montana in general, has a very, very robust technical infrastructure. And people think about the weather as like, oh, this is like Canada. It's very cold, but it kind of depends on where you are. Southern Montana in the like Bozeman area is way colder than we are up here, and we're 6 hours north, right, by driving. So it's a pretty amazing and utopic place to live.
I guess that's the mountain issue that mitigates some of the cold. Is that what it is? The fact that there's
it has a lot more to do with jet streams,
okay,
and the way that jet streams move out of Canada and then across the United States.
Got it. Okay. Let's talk about going into the military. So is that in your family? What kind of motivated you to think I'm going in the military? And then how did you choose the Air Force and then pararescue? You don't hear as much about, you mentioned Andy as being a friend. You got to give him a hard time about the whole, the SEALs talk all about it. It's all this SEAL stuff. Pararescue doesn't seem to get as much talk. And yet from what I've read, again, not being in the service, but paying a lot of attention to those that have been, it's as rigorous a selection process as there is pararescue.
The statistics would agree with you. So No, no military background in my family at all. I think I was the first person to join, active duty military, join the fighting military. I think I had a grandfather who was a merchant marine in World War II, but that was, I think, pretty much it. And so no history of that. For me, it was just I wanted to go do cool stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, most of the time when people say, at 18 years old, or if they did early enlistment, which I did early enlistment, 17 years old, if you're saying that you're joining the military out of this incredible sense of patriotism, I'm gonna say no. Most of it is you just want to do really cool stuff, or
Yeah.
there are obviously people who kind of have no other option
Right.
and they feel like they need to join the military to get out of the, I don't know, inner city gang situation they're in, or they need to join the military to be able to pay for college
Right.
or hit a hard reset on their life. I mean, there's any number of reasons
Mm.
why people go in. But for me, at 18 years old, coming out of a very, very awesome middle class family, it was very supportive. I wasn't trying to like kind of flee anything. I just wanted to do really cool stuff. It's just
Yep.
kind of what it came down to.
Love
And
it.
you learn all the importance of what it is that you're doing when you get to your units and you actually start doing the work. But
Right.
the beginning of it was I just want to do really cool stuff, and I wanted to do really hard stuff. I had, growing up, had been a very active Boy Scout, became an Eagle Scout, and that is a whole lot harder than people realize. Granted, it's not physically harder, but just
Yep.
from a commitment and a time commitment perspective, it's a lot more difficult than people realize. And so I I think I just wanted to do hard things
Yep.
and I wanted to do cool things. And the military is probably the easiest way to find yourself doing very hard and very cool things. I mean, where else are you going to get paid to
Yep.
learn how to swim with your hands and feet tied in
Right.
10 feet of water and also get to get a jump out of airplanes? I mean, the things that I was getting to do were the things that most people pay to do. And I'm getting to learn to do those at a professional level and getting to go to the best schools in the world. I mean, the best dive school in the world, and definitely by the statistics, the hardest school in the U.S. Army anyway, is the Army's Special Forces Underwater Operations School in Key West, Florida. And so I went to that school, graduated, so got to get that level of instruction in, say, scuba diving, right, or combat diving,
Right.
and went to Halo School. Well, that's arguably the best entry level skydive school in the world. So when you start looking at it through that lens, it's like, oh wow, you get paid to go. Not paid a lot.
Yeah.
You just don't really have a need for a lot of money
Right.
at that point, and you get to go do some really really cool things.
Yep. Yep. Okay. And so, do you remember why you chose Air Force versus some of the other services? Was there a specific reason?
I actually originally wanted to be a SEAL, and I wanted to be a SEAL corpsman, right? So a medic in the SEAL teams. And when I went in to go talk to the Navy recruiter, right, because I'd seen the marketing around the SEALs in the 80s and
Charlie
90s,
Sheen movie,
kind of really the only ground force that was marketing a lot, the SEALs in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And I talked to the Marine Corps, and I'd been a ski patroller, a volunteer ski patroller when I was in high school, and so I wanted to do the medical thing because at least at the time, I thought I was a lot more interested in medicine than I actually was. But I liked the trauma side of things, but that's not really medicine, as most medics will tell you. So I really wanted to be a medic. Went in, I talked to the Marine Corps recruiter, and they were like, yeah, we don't have medics.
No medics.
All of our medics come from the Navy. All right. So then I go talk to the Navy and wanted to be a SEAL corpsman. And the Navy said, well, we can give you a contract to go to BUDS and try out to be a SEAL, but we can't guarantee you a medic slot. If you become a SEAL, you are going to get whatever slot the Navy needs you to slide into.
Yep.
And that might be medic, it might not. And that was something where most of the SEALs that I know, and I know a ton of them, most of them, the reason that they wanted to go be a SEAL was because they wanted to be a SEAL. It wasn't necessarily because of the job. It wasn't because of they wanted to do a very specific thing. It was like, no, they wanted to get that trident and they wanted to be a Navy SEAL, which is awesome.
Right.
I didn't really care about the branch. I didn't care about the patch I was going to wear. I cared about the job. There's a very specific thing that I wanted to do, and that was I wanted to be what is now called a Special Operations Combat Medic. But back then it was kind of in a blanket referred to as an 18 Delta. I wanted to do that type of job. And so the SEALs were like, yeah, we can't really guarantee you that. Then I went into the Army recruiter to see about Special Forces medic. And at the time, you couldn't go straight into Special Forces. You had to do a year or two in the infantry or the Ranger Battalion or something like that. And then you would have the opportunity to go try out for Special Forces. And then if you did try out for Special Forces, they still couldn't guarantee you that you would be an 18 Delta. They couldn't guarantee you Halo school. They couldn't guarantee you dive school. And so I was really leaning towards the SEAL side because I was like, well, at least I'm going to get, some kind of what in my impression at the time was better training and whatnot. And then the Air Force recruiter came in and hit me up in the hallway as I was walking out of the Navy's office and said, hey, talk to you about the Air Force. I'm like, I'm not interested in the freaking Air Force. I'm not really interested in flying planes. And like, what else am I going to do in the Air Force? Right. And so he started talking to me about pararescue. And I wasn't really that interested. And then he said, well, guaranteed to be a medic, combat medic, guaranteed Halo school, guaranteed combat dive. Here it's the longest special operations pipeline. So and that's just because of all the schools you go to. You just kind of learn more at the entry level. And then he was like, but you know what? It's a really, really high failure rate. You probably wouldn't make it anyway. And I was like, all right, that's it.
And I'm
so I end up in his office and watch their little, cheesy recruiting video. And I thought that was pretty cool. And simultaneously, my mom had been out kind of doing some of her own, research and trying to gather information for me. And she'd brought home a couple of brochures. And one of them was a pararescue brochure. And she actually was very, my parents, I don't think really wanted me to do that. But at the same time, they realized that I'd already made up my mind. And so they may as well kind of help direct me in something that they felt like I would fit from a personality perspective. And so she had seen the pararescue brochures and was like, oh, hey, here's kind of everything that you've said that you want to do. And that's just kind of the way I ended up in pararescue.
Wow. I'm always intrigued by the recruiting stories, and you hear about people that have these, like a prolific career in one branch or the other. And it's because the start of the story was, well, I was going to go there, but the guy was out to lunch and he wasn't at his office. And the other guy that's right down the hall pulled me in and showed me a video or talked to me. And then bam, all of a sudden I'm running down this whole other pathway. And you think, man, it seems so random or just based, these, again, careers that can just go off in these directions, and it starts from some bizarre recruiter interaction that either goes one way or another way, and it to me it adds to the story. But it's amusing and entertaining. But go ahead.
It's one of the things I get asked a lot, by either friends or people online, whatnot, to hey, will you talk to my son about joining the military? And I don't always have the time to do it, but I try to when I can. And usually the conversation starts like, oh, I want to go in and be special forces, or I want to go be pararescue or combat control or something like that. Yeah. And I always stop these kids and say, look, stop. Tell me about the movie that's playing in your head. Don't tell me about what job you want to go do, right? Or what career field you think you want to enter. Tell me about the movie that's playing in your head. Like, so are you imagining yourself behind, a sniper rifle and a sniper hide somewhere? If that's the movie playing in your head, then Air Force Pararescue is not the way for you to go. Not that PJs don't, some PJs don't do that kind of stuff, but that's the exception, not the rule. However, if the movie playing in your head is you're, rescuing people out of a bunch of rubble, well, then pararescue is 100% the way to go. Or if you're, imagining that you're calling in bombs off a mountaintop, well, then it's not that PJs don't do that every once in a while, but you should probably go be a combat controller. So I like to really help people understand like what the job is, and then go do that. Versus if they say, oh, I want to go be Delta Force. Right. Okay, well, it's a long road to get there, and there's a I mean, the probability that you're going to get there is extremely low. So let's talk about the roads that get you there versus if someone says, well, I really want to be part of SEAL Team 6. Okay, well, then you really kind of only have one option, and that's to go be a SEAL.
Right.
So I like to help people understand that, all of these different special operations components, one, they're all great programs. I mean, for the most part, with exceptions, and there's always exceptions, but for the most part, anybody who would have been a PJ would have been just fine being a SEAL, would have been just fine being Special Forces or something like that. Anybody who would have been a Special Forces operator probably would have been, made it through the SEAL pipeline or the PJ pipeline. I mean, I don't get into this whole like our selection process is harder than anybody else's because it's just a bunch of egotistical crap. But when you look at the different programs, they all have things that they specialize in. It's not that there's not this joint environment cross-pollination of missions where you've got Special Forces guys doing shipboarding and you've got SEALs out there doing, foreign internal defense missions. Yes, those things do exist. However, every special operations component has kind of their core bread and butter mission, which is the thing that all of their centralized training revolves around. And that is, I think, really where people should make their decisions on what they want to do when they join the military.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. I heard somebody say at one point, I can't remember where it was, if I was listening to another show or if this is a conversation I have, but that question that you talk about, like what movie do you have playing in your head and what do you kind of see yourself doing? If the answer came back, well, I want to, I see myself like I want to kick indoors and go get bad guys. And so that's why I want to join. That's why I want to be a SEAL. The response was, well, you should maybe think about the Army because what you're aspiring to do is maybe what is being done Special Forces or Delta. But if you somehow fail or you get hurt and you don't make it, well, the guys in the Army are still kind of kicking indoors and wearing night vision, doing that stuff, just not at the same maybe level or special operations way, but they're still doing that thing. Whereas if you go do that as a SEAL and don't make it, you're going to the fleet and you're not going to be doing anything remotely like that. It's very different.
So to me, it's a bit of a mindset shift though. And it's a little bit different. So I agree that if you are like, okay, well, what is it that I want to do and what's the backup plan? Then you're 100% right.
Yeah.
I think the proper mentality though, for going into special operations is there is no backup plan.
No backup. Yeah.
So at the time when I joined the Air Force, you couldn't get what was called a GTEP, or essentially a guaranteed slot to pararescue. Right? You would join the Air Force in some other career field, and then you would have the opportunity to try out for pararescue when you were in Air Force basic training, and then if you made it through that tryout, then you would get to go to selection. So there's a whole series of hoops that you had to jump through over your basic training process, which I think was like 6 weeks. Like, so about every week you were going and doing something to try to get into the selection process. And once you made it into selection, then that was really that was the 0 point. All that other stuff was you were at a negative and you were trying to get to 0. And, and just getting through selection was getting to 1 as an example. Right.
Yeah.
So when I joined the Air Force, I had to sign a contract for some career field, and my dad came with me as for the contract signing thing. And obviously he kind of wanted to make sure I wasn't getting screwed over. And the Air Force recruiter was not one of those, bad name recruiters.
Right.
I mean, he was for what I can remember, a pretty good dude and was pretty honest about things. And so I go in and the Air Force recruiter said, okay, like getting ready to enlist in the Air Force, you have to pick a job. We understand you want to go pararescue, but we can't put that on the contract. You have to pick a job. And I was like, well, no, I don't, because I'm going to go pararescue. He's like, well, you have a greater than 90% chance of not making it into pararescue for any number of reasons,
right.
Hurt, medical, quit, fail, whatever. So you have to pick a job. Like the Air Force wants to know what they're going to do with you if you don't make it. And I was just, the arrogance of my youth, just I'm going to make it. It's not even a question. Or later, yes, there might be a greater than 90% chance for everybody else, but not for me.
Right.
And that was my mindset. And so finally I was just like, fine, just put like whatever, a mechanic or something. Right. And my dad was just, head in his hands, just like, oh my gosh, maybe this pain will be a good lesson for him. Right. But the point was I didn't have a backup plan.
Yeah.
I was going pararescue. And when I was in basic training, it was like, well, what's your job? I'm going pararescue. And I remember other instructors, these drill instructors, laughing at me. A couple of them had tried to be PJs and they didn't make it. And so one of them was, I distinctly remember him coming in, like checking behind my ears. He's like, oh, I don't see any gills. You're probably not going to make it. Yeah. It was not and it was actually kind of a disappointing, and those drill instructors, quite frankly, should have been a lot more professional instead of coming down on me because they couldn't do it. Yeah. They should have said, oh, right on. Glad to see that you're aiming for the top of the mountain. Yeah. Let's see what we can do to help make you successful in that. Right. Or, you know what? I tried and didn't make it, but hopefully you'll be able to. Instead, it was almost this mentality of like, well, I didn't make it, so I'm gonna try to grind on this kid to make sure he doesn't make it either. Right. Yeah. Which they just fail to understand the personality of somebody like me. Like, you grind on me and it's just going to make me stronger. Right. Right. It's just going to make me more motivated to win. Yeah. But that was really the mentality in when I went into the Air Force. And I think that's really, I would see somebody who went in with a mentality of like, well, I want to do these things, but if I don't make it, then I want to have these backup plans. I'll tell you right there, the chances that person makes it are near zero. Yeah. Every person who makes it through those selection processes, if you talk to them, almost to a man, again, there's always going to be exceptions. They always say that, yeah, I knew I was going to make it. Right. When quitting wasn't an option. I was watching other people quit, and I wasn't going, oh, well, maybe I should quit. It was, no, I'm going to continue on. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have the fleeting thought of like,
this sucks
of quitting
in the moment.
Or something that creeps into their brain that they smash down. But it's every single person that I know who was successful in a special operations selection process. They all knew from the very moment that they showed up that they were going to make it through that process. And they all knew before they ever signed any contracts that they were going to make it through that process. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's actually this, I've talked about this on my show before, this idea of a desperate man is a dangerous man, right? If you have a plan B, if you have an out or an exit, there's always that potential. Your brain starts to entertain that exit, that option as being better than the primary, as being more worthwhile. And if you have no exit, if there is no other door, if there's only one way, well, you're going to give the full measure of your ability to get through that one way, because there just is no other thing, right? And I think that could be said for business, whether it's business or family, whatever it might be. If you have other choices and options, while on the surface, that's the reasonable thing to do. People always want to ask you, what's your plan B? Mm-hmm. But if you have that plan B and it's actually enticing, like a reasonably good plan B, well, then plan A may not be all that, like, why are you even pursuing plan A if plan B is all that great, right? And then why do you...
If you're doing something where you need a backup option, then chances are what you're doing is just not that hard.
Yeah. Or that desirable or that whatever, right?
Yeah. And so having, in your mind, because there's always a plan B, right? So if I didn't make it into pararescue, I wasn't going to die. If I didn't make it into, Harvard, I wasn't going to die. If I didn't make it into CIA, I wasn't going to die. But you look at the statistical significance of any one of those things, and it's a really high bar. What you find, though, is that once you jump over one high bar, it makes it easier to jump over the next one and then jump over the next one. And then you just kind of have this personal standard of always trying to swing for the fences. And it doesn't mean that you don't have those failures. Everything that was difficult that I ever tried to do, it probably took me at least 2 tries, at least. And and there's a wake of failures behind you. Nobody sees that wake of failures, and you continually getting up after getting knocked down and just trying again and trying again. In fact, in some of the Joint Special Operations Command selection processes, they will actually, if they find somebody maybe did a little too good, right? Because you do have those just kind of phenoms out there who are just genetic anomalies, and they just crush everything they try. I've never had the privilege of being one of those people, but they do exist, and there are times where the commanders will fail them at their boards just to see if they will if they have the humility to come back and try again.
Interesting. That's interesting. And it's that I've heard a similar around, like elite athletes, collegiate athletes that fail out of selection processes because it's really the first time in their life that they've had to struggle, that they've had to be uncomfortable, that they weren't held upon on a pedestal of like, man, this is the athlete, right? And all of a sudden they're just one of the guys, and they're in the muck, and they're just kind of suffering. And it's like, I've never experienced this, I don't know how to deal with it, right? As opposed to the guy that was a grinder his whole life, that he just keeps grinding because that's all he knows how to do is grind and pick himself back up and keep going.
Well, you get the guy who's the Montana State high school wrestling champion, in featherweight or whatever. And okay, like great. And that's not taking away from the hard work that person put in, but it's Montana. Right. Then they get a scholarship to Ohio State.
Yeah.
And they were the Montana champion.
Yeah.
And they're in the bottom third of their wrestling team at Ohio State.
Yeah.
And then, okay, so you're in the top 10 in your wrestling team at Ohio State. Great. You're still not good enough to make the Olympic team.
Right.
And so there's always this level higher. My wife tells a story. My wife's this incredibly, brilliant person. And she tells a story about when she got her first, or actually it was her second real job out of college. And she's been with the same company ever since. And they're known for having an extremely high hiring standard. And so she got the job. She's there day one, and somebody high level in the company, was giving a welcome message and said, you are all used to being unicorns in the places that you came from. Well, now you're in a herd of unicorns.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing in the special operations world. If you have a bunch of people who made it through those selection processes, I mean, you do have to be smart, you do have to be strong, you do have to be healthy, but you also have to have a little bit of luck on your side. There are so many people who were smarter, faster, and stronger than I was who failed out of pararescue selection just because they kind of got unlucky, right? Their femur broke in the middle of a run or something, just unbelievable like that, or they had something fall on them, a boat fall on their head or something. I mean, there is such a thing as just kind of getting unlucky. But then you get to a team, and every single person at that team has been through those selection processes. You just took a whole bunch of people who are smart, who are strong, who are healthy, and are lucky, and put them all together in a team.
Yeah.
Now they can pretty much accomplish anything. And that is one of the things that you learn when you get to your special operations unit, is that the worst guy on your team still met the bare minimum standard that the other 90% of people couldn't meet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Man, I could keep talking on this because this is a subject I just love. I love high performing athletes and people, and love digging deep there. So, but I do want to keep pressing forward because your story is, man, so rich, so many aspects to it. So you go off after you complete selection. You go off to your unit. You go to combat. What kind of era were you in the military? Kind of time frame?
So 90s into post 2011, into post 9/11.
Yeah.
And one of the things that people don't realize is that during the 90s, during the Clinton years, there was all kinds of these little special operations skirmishes and things going on. So before September 11th, I believe I deployed, I want to say it was like 13 times and yeah, every single time was to a combat zone. So there was Operation Northern Watch, Operation Southern Watch. There were all of these little things going on in Africa, and and they were, I mean, they were little mini wars, right?
Yeah.
Or what the Pentagon refers to as SOLICs, right? So special operations, low intensity conflicts. They were, we were still smacking Saddam and dropping bombs on him and getting into little skirmishes with him. We were helping the Kurds. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember first coming into contact with Kurdish forces in, I'm gonna say it was like 99, 2000. So we were doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of stuff going on in the Philippines that the PJs out of Japan were doing, and so pararescue has been involved in near constant combat as a career field since Vietnam. And I'd heard SEAL friends of mine say how before 9/11
Mm.
they had like never chambered a round in their rifle for in a real world circumstance. It was
Yeah.
always training or something like that, but they'd never actually done anything. I was like, oh man, I remember the first time like getting incoming rounds and receiving enemy fire was, I want to say 98.
Oh,
It was
wow.
like mid 98.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah.
in southern Iraq. And so because pararescue always had all these things going on, you were constantly getting deployed. We're also, I believe, the most critically manned career field in the United States military, or one of.
Mm.
So we were supposed to have, something like 1,500 Air Force pararescuemen, or 1,200 Air Force pararescuemen is what the books say that the military is supposed to have. And at the time, if you included the Guard and Reserve, so even the part-time PJs, we were sitting right around 500.
Oh, wow.
So you were gone 10 months a year, just constantly. Either you were deployed for training or you were deployed for real world operations, and you could submit for your leave, but you never really got to take it.
Wow. Wow. I hadn't really considered that even when you think about, again, as a civilian, my perception is if we don't have active troops on the ground, people, I guess, boots on the ground would be the right reference. We still might be doing air missions and air combat type of things as the kind of first step before we would consider putting people on the ground. And that's all about the Air Force, right? And so I could see where a pararescueman is going to have a very high tempo because there's a lot of things that never get to the point of putting boots on the ground. And yet we still have air campaigns going on. And,
or, Operation, what was it? I want to say it was Desert Fox or Desert Thunder, one of those two. It was my PJ team and a SEAL team went into southern Iraq to do some stuff, and so that was like that stuff was constantly happening. It was, yes, we had boots on the ground, but it was kind of an in and out boots on the ground.
I got you.
Not this consistent presence that we've really gotten used to since 9/11.
20 years, yeah, for sure. Yep. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit. So you come to the end of your Air Force career and come out, is that right? And then start in private business and start a business? Is that kind of talk about that transition out?
No, I started at I got a job as the third employee at a private personnel recovery startup. I wasn't obviously the founder, but I was employee number 3. So there was the founder, and then the second person he hired, and then me.
Yeah.
And so the company's still around. They are, I think, doing relatively well. I'd wanted to kind of go check that block. So there's lots of people who will be in the military and have very, very good military careers, but then they just absolutely suck at business. Or they come out and they maybe weren't that great in the military, but they just absolutely rock business. And so I'd been reading a bunch of books. I'm a pretty prolific reader, and Jim Collins' Good to Great had just come out, and I'd read that, just kind of devoured that book, and decided that I wanted to at least go try some, go see what the civilian world was all about. Because keep in mind, I was 28 years old when I got out, and I had been in the military really my entire adult life. So I wanted to go see what the civilian world was all about. So I started doing that, and then I ended up so I left that job. It was should we say a just some leadership disagreements
Parting of the
between
ways, right?
myself and the CEO, and under, you know, the way that things should ethically be done. And I had a good ethical and moral compass then that wasn't really a good fit for that company. And so I decided to leave and ended up kind of falling backwards into an opportunity to work with some A-list actors in Hollywood. I did that for about 6 months, and then I got a phone call saying, "Hey, would you like to come try out for a specialized program? Can't tell you what it is or who it's for, but if you're interested, please send this information to this email address." And so I think if you ever get that call, the question is always yes, I would like to learn more.
Yes.
And so I submitted my package. You know, I got just a pretty random email that said, "Here's some very specific things that you need to send in." I sent those things in. I mean, they even wanted copies of old military orders proving deployments and things like that. And so I said okay, and sent in my package, and then I got another email saying, you know, "You've been selected to come to a tryout. If you're interested, let us know. We need information for your plane ticket." And they flew me to Virginia and Maryland, and I ended up, you know, just in a kind of a nondescript office building with a bunch of other people in the room, and they came in and gave us a bunch of tests, and then, you know, there was probably 2/3 of us passed those tests, and they asked a third of the people to leave, and the other 2/3, it was you're trying out for a program in the Central Intelligence Agency. I very specifically remember them saying, "This is how we will refer to ourselves from now on. This is the last time, you know, CIA will be used in conversation." And tryout starts tomorrow. We'll pick everybody up from the hotel that they had us in. We'll pick everybody up from the hotel at noon, and buses will be waiting, and we'll drive you out to the place that you'll be for the next month. And so that was a, you know, pretty interesting experience, and that's kind of how I ended up getting into the CIA.
So, all right. So that just has Jason Bourne written all over it, man. I mean, what you just described there is like, I'm pretty sure it's a good chunk of one of the movies where it's like, you're going to be part of this program, and, you know, do you want to, how serious are you about being in this program? I can literally hear the lines in my head. So, but before we dive into that, I have to back up a step and ask you about the Hollywood thing. So what were you doing with the actors in Hollywood? Were you consulting on movies around military stuff, or was it
Yeah,
something
so I
else?
was a military technical advisor
Okay.
under a company called Global Operational Resources Group for the what was it? It's a Terminator Salvation. And
Oh, right on.
I
Yeah.
don't remember like where it is in the like whole Terminator series. I want to say it's like 5 or 6 or something like
Okay.
that.
I was going to say 4, but yeah, it could be. It's down there somewhere.
Yeah,
But
maybe
yeah,
it's I don't
think
know.
it was maybe
It's
4.
one of those, but yeah. So I ended up working pretty closely with the actors on that movie, and some of them are still actually very good friends to this day.
Right on.
And yeah, just showing them how to look like they knew what they were doing with firearms.
Did you
And
help
I
Linda
just
Hamilton? Was Linda Hamilton one of that group? Because she
that
was
name
she
doesn't sound
okay.
familiar.
She was in the at least the first couple as John Connor's mom, right? Linda Hamilton, which, you know, for a kid that grew up in the 80s as a teenager in the 80s, she was the bomb, right? She was pretty cool. Her and Sigourney Weaver
No,
were both pretty
this
cool.
was a redheaded woman.
Okay. I don't, yeah.
Um,
I may not have made it all the way to Salvation then on Terminator Salvation. Because I can't, I'm trying to think of who that would have been. But I know she did, Linda Hamilton, who was the original, she eventually did not continue on the series, but just curious because she was definitely, you know, pretty big on the Hollywood scale. I think back in that 86 to 90 time frame ish.
yeah.
But
And it's funny, Jeff Silver, the president of Halcyon Pictures, was there the whole time, and I got to know him pretty well. And him and a director named McG, and so McG and Jeff came up to me. You know, we had just kind of finished all the shooting, and they were like, "Hey man, like we need to get your number. We're going to change your life. We're going to turn you into a Hollywood person." And I was like, "Nope, not interested
yeah,
at all. I'm going to go back to war. I'm going to go back to working for the government."
right.
That was when I learned that the you know, kind of career Hollywood. They're great people had an awesome time, but the career of being in Hollywood was just not a good fit for me.
Yeah.
It was not authentic.
Yeah, that's well said. I was going to ask about that. It sounds like, and what I love there is the idea, and you mentioned about having, you had a compass that was really keeping you on course or guiding sort of your decision making from a career choice, and where you were spending time, who you're spending time with. It's kind of what I heard there, right? That even though on the surface it could be it could get enamored with, I'm going to be around celebrities, people with influence, people with power, people with money. You're coming out of the military. Maybe that stuff is attractive, but clearly it wasn't attractive enough to keep you engaged, right? And you're like, nope, not a fit. Moving on back to back to doing something where it did feel like a better fit for you.
Yeah, I mean, financially, it was probably the dumbest decision I ever made. I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe,
maybe
but not.
There's just so much more. There's so much more to life than that.
Yeah.
And I think that if you again, you go all the way back to the beginning. Why did I join the Air Force? I want to do cool stuff.
Yeah.
And then it kind of became, I wanted to do really meaningful and impactful work. And not to degrade anybody working in Hollywood, like, thank you for the entertainment, but you're not saving people. This is not This is not like, pediatric child surgery or saving people from human trafficking or whatever. Right. And it's not that there's a problem with that. It's just that is not a good fit for me. And what I learned is that about myself and being a PJ is that I had to have impactful work. I had to have things that mattered.
Yeah.
And I hadn't quite figured it out to the level that I have now, but if I just intuitively knew that if I didn't have work that mattered, if what I did on a daily basis was not kind of advancing the ball of society into a better place, then I was not going to be happy. Yeah. But unfortunately, that means that usually you're kind of taking on some of the harder things that nobody else wants to do. Because let's face it, it's very easy to go do the standard road. And there's nothing wrong with people who kind of take the standard path. We need lots of people to take the standard path. I mean, if everybody in the world was a me, the world would be a flaming dumpster fire because there wouldn't be anybody to keep it in order.
Yeah.
And so we don't need everybody to go be an innovator. We don't need everybody to go out and try to do the hardest things that there are. But if you are one of those types of people, then you do need to know about yourself that you need to follow that authentic path in being who you are, because those other people, they don't get it. They don't understand. They don't say, well, wait a minute, you're going to go overseas. Probability that you die just in training and in special operations is actually pretty high. I mean, I lost my two best friends within a year of us graduating pararescue school, right? They both died in helicopter crashes. And that was just the first 12 months
in training.
So I assumed I was not going to live to see 30. I actually didn't think I would live to see 25. And here I am now, 45.
Right.
But I didn't think I would, because and then after that, this guy named McDermott died, and then there was a little bit of a year where nobody died, and then we lost a couple more people. And when you're talking about losing people every single year in a career field that's less than 500 people, that's a pretty darn high rate. And those are just people who died.
Yeah.
Every single year we had people with career-ending injuries where entire legs would be shattered, or a guy who ended up getting shot in the face, and it caused all kinds of problems for him, obviously. So that doesn't include the injuries.
Yeah.
So most people, when they hear that type of risk that you're taking on, like, wait a minute, you're going to go do these things. You're not really going to ever get to take a vacation. You're going to be on 24/7. You're going to be gone at least 10 months a year, and you're going to go do all that for $45,000.
Right. Yeah.
Most people are not willing to take on anywhere near that kind of risk for such little pay.
Right. Or at all, for any amount of pay.
Or at all. Yeah. That's a great point. For any amount of pay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious, were you married during this time too? Did you have a family while this was? going
I
on?
wasn't. I got married right at the end of my time in pararescue, and that was pretty short lived. It lived into my start with the Central Intelligence Agency, and then it ended in divorce, like the other
I
86%
was going to
of my
say
unit
it's
at the CIA.
yeah, devastating. Yeah, that the divorce rate is like you said the statistic. It's extremely high because of all the things you mentioned, right? The stress, the time away, all that, all those pieces. In fact, it's yeah. So all right, so let's talk about you're now in the CIA and you're going through the selection and getting through that process for this job that's somewhat unknown or being revealed to you over, in time, I suppose, as to what it's actually going to be, and talk a bit about because then you start to deploy again as a member of the Central Intelligence Agency in this new role, right? Pardon the interruption, everyone. Do you ever feel like you're out of alignment with your true gifts, your passion, and your purpose for being on this earth? Do you feel like you're grinding it out each week with the appearance of success and still asking, is this it? If so, I get it. I've been right where you're at. And once I figured it out for myself, it's why I started coaching. Now I help my clients get back into alignment with their authentic self. I help them find meaning, purpose, joy, and energy in each day. Check out my website at ericsardina.com to learn more and to schedule a free 15-minute strategy session. And now, back to the show.
Right. So I went through the vetting process, just what they call it. It was 30 days, and some of it was like, oh wow, this is really cool and this is really good training. And other parts of it, I was like, is this like part of the selection? Is they just want to see if you're going to do something that's stupid? I mean, nothing is this incredibly cool thing like the movies make it out to be, but it was really good people. It was only men, really good men in my training class. For the most part, I really liked these people. They're people I could see myself working with. Still didn't know really what the mission was. It was, and I know now why. It's because they didn't know what the mission was. Because every place you would deploy, the mission would be a little bit different. Some places, if you were at, say, one of the flagpoles, it was a lot of kind of driving Miss Daisy and, being just being the gun guy and facilitating some intelligence operations. But if you were out in the FOBs, it was kind of some like, integrating in with CAG, Delta Force, or one of the JSOC units or one of the SOCOM units, doing some really cool sensor work, doing some other type of stuff. And so it was, it was just they only recruited out of special operations at the time, right? You had to have at the time, a minimum of 6 years of special operations experience just to even be asked to apply. And then again, the beginning was taking those tests, and a third of these former special operators didn't score high enough on those tests, academic tests, in order to make it in. So then it was all shooting from there. It was all shooting and fighting, shooting and fighting, shooting and fighting. And so you're like, oh, this is pretty interesting. And then you do those testings, and then you finally, you get deployed. I mean, really, if you want to deploy about, a week after you get done with the vetting process, you could. I had some stuff to wrap up with the Hollywood deal, so I went ahead and waited about a month and a half, and then I deployed. And then it's okay, well, where are you deploying and what's your assignment when you get there? So I deployed to the Middle East, into one of the war zones. But when I got there, there was two teams, and I got assigned to one of the teams that was assigned to the Special Activities Division. And so we were doing some like really, really interesting stuff. And the other team what they were doing was, quite frankly, a little bit boring. And so, because anybody who thinks that, well, I don't care if it's military special ops or kinetically focused units at the Central Intelligence Agency, 60% of your job is going to be pretty darn boring. Only about 2% of it is life flash before your eyes, exciting. The rest of it is, operationally, especially at the CIA, if you're good at your job, you there's not really a whole lot that goes wrong, and things only get really exciting when things go wrong. You're always wondering whether or not you're going to get caught. Like, are we actually going to pull off this op in the way that we think we're going to? And then you do pull it off, and you're like, oh wow, that was so cool. But most of the time, I don't care what your special operations background is or your central intelligence background. It's going to be pretty benign. I mean, you got to keep in mind, members of Delta Force, who are probably the premier hostage rescue unit in the world, they still have to do security for the president, and they still have to do security for, you know, whatever general's in charge of Afghanistan, and they still got to do kind of like Secret Service type work. And that's just the way that it is. If you're a competent man with a gun and the ability to think on your feet, which you are if you're playing at those levels, you're gonna have to do some boring stuff. So that's how. Anyway, when I got to that unit, we didn't really know exactly what the mission was, and now I know why. It's because the mission was different in every single place that you would deploy to. Obviously, some commonality, but for the most part, how you executed that mission was different. And so you had to just be somebody who could get plugged into a team and could figure it out relatively quickly.
Yep. And so what you're sort of describing, or what I'm hearing, seems like the skill set is sort of a direct action, like the value, there's a lot of value around use of a gun and being able to kind of, you know, act in a very kinetic fashion and get things accomplished. And yet I was more envisioning from the bio and when the workup, sort of a data, a technology.
Oh no.
When does that start to come into play, or was this not, so it's not even close? So, okay. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. So that unit actually does a lot of things with tech, but it's only a few people in that unit that do a lot with tech, because there's a lot of guys who, for whatever reason, they're just not very technically adept. The aptitude for technology isn't there. They're more of, shall we say, blunt instruments.
Yep.
Right. Very good with guns.
Yep.
Right. Very physically fit. Very good decision makers. But there was a number of us who kind of had an interest in the tech stuff, and there was always technical operations that needed to be accomplished. And so we were the kind of go-to people for those technical operations, or we were running the technical side of our team. So we were running our tactical communication systems, and we were running the systems that are running on laptops and some of the other electronic interrogation stuff that we were doing. It was all like, we would kind of be the go-to person for tech. And one of the cool things about the Central Intelligence Agency is that if you show an aptitude for something, and then your team leaders, because you don't start usually as a team leader, your team leaders see that, then they will open up doors for you to go get more and more training. So I remember I went to the Palantir analyst course, and I show up, and I was the very first person from my unit ever to go to that course. And they were, when I walked in, they kind of looked at me like, "Hey, buddy, are you lost?" Like, you very clearly, you're not supposed to be here. I was like, no, I'm supposed to be here. And they're like, "Oh, like, did you get in trouble or something? Like, why are you being sent here?" Like, no, I actually asked to go to this course. And so it was, okay, sure. Yeah. Well, take a seat right over there. And I learned to do that stuff, because to me, I think a lot of people will get into those types of environments and they take this mentality of like, I have arrived, right? So like, I know a guy who was a Navy SEAL who, it was a Navy SEAL the same time I was, never deployed to combat, not even a single time. Yeah. And he would give me flack about like, "Oh, you were in the chair force." I'm like, well, first of all, you didn't deploy to combat a single time, and I did 14 times. Yeah. You never ever once received enemy fire, and I did like in the late 90s. Yeah. So the question, like, do you want to just earn a patch so you can wear the patch,
Right.
or do you actually want to do things,
Do the work?
Do you want to be an asset? Do you want to move the ball forward down the field for your team? And to me, the best way to do that is to learn more and more skills. So I had proven that I could run a gun just as good as they could because I made it through the same processes that they went through. I could do all those things, but then there were these other skill sets that were not an evaluated part of your job, but you brought you were really considered an asset to the entire team and the entire unit and the entire agency if you could master those things, right? So the first was the communications piece, and I mastered that. Obviously, being a pararescueman, kind of once a medic, always a medic. I was not hired to be a medic. But in a lot of places, especially in some of the FOBs, I was really the only person with any medical experience there. And anybody else that they needed medical experience from, they'd have to bring in a helicopter to bring that person in.
Yeah.
So I was always looking at how I could be more of an asset to my team, to the unit, and to the agency, and to the fight overall. And that's a lot more work, but you kind of always have this, I call it the perpetual new guy mentality. When you're new at a unit, you're just a sponge and you're always trying to absorb things. But a lot of people, once they master the basics of their job, they don't really take it much farther. And I didn't want to be one of those people. I wanted to be somebody who was just always learning new skills. And so that's how I ended up kind of stumbling into a lot of the tech stuff. And it was because I had put myself out there to look like a complete idiot, right? When I was at Palantir course, I'm in there with all these career analysts who've been doing, I mean, some of them had been doing analysis for over a decade.
Yeah.
And I'm the new guy who is seeing this type of software for the very first time. And that's a pretty humiliating, I shouldn't say humiliating, but humbling experience to be in. And so, but I was there to learn. And so I looked at that as a privilege of I got to be in this room learning from all these people who've been doing this for over a decade, and they were more than happy to teach me. So I got way more than a week's worth of training out of that 1 week course that I went to. I think I was a little more than a week, but anyway, I got more training. I got way more out of it than they did. So but then they got to have some interaction with somebody like me who they normally didn't get to have really any personal interaction with. It was just like get in the back of the car, or hey, you're going to meet up with this person at this time, and it was a lot better for them to get to experience people from my unit in a way that was should we say a little less hard.
Yeah. What comes up for me there is a couple things. One is that willingness to be bad, and I think that's a trait that anybody that wants to be great at something has to be willing to suck at it first. They have to be willing to be bad at it. And yet what's interesting and amazing and inspiring about your story is you had achieved some very, very high level things, very, very kind of, smallest percentages of accomplishment to get to that level. And the tendency, I think, is to sort of let the ego go, I have arrived, right? And I don't have to go back to being the guy that's the idiot in the corner that doesn't understand even how to turn the computer on, or what is the homepage of the software look like. I don't want to feel dumb like that anymore. I want to feel cool guy stuff, and I want to be around cool guys that are like me, and I want to show them that I'm maybe a little bit better than them, but I really don't want to go be back at the back of the class. And yet you were willing to do that. And I think that's really anyone that's looking to go be great at anything, be a great speaker, be a great teacher, be a great whatever, has to be willing to be bad first. And that's hard. It's hard on the ego, especially for someone that's accomplished a lot in their life in some realm or another, to be willing to then go back and be bad. And it sounds like you consistently are willing, or were willing, or are willing to go be the knucklehead in order to become great at something down the road, right?
Yeah. And I think it's also putting yourself out there. So I go on these podcasts, right? I've been on hundreds of them at this point, and I say stuff that's wrong all the time. I screw things up all the time. I'll say 864% where I meant 846%, or you just kind of confuse things. as people do in normal everyday life and conversation, and I'll get called out on it by somebody who does a lot of talking but doesn't do a lot of doing. And I laugh it off, because show me the person who's never made a mistake. In fact, the more mistakes you make, the chances are, as long as it's obviously not a consistent pattern of the same mistake, the more mistakes you make, chances are the more you're actually doing. And the more you're actually accomplishing. And I don't care if that's in the gym, in your home life, in your business life, just the ability to just continue learning and being humble enough to suck at something.
Yeah, 100%. And there's a great lesson there to be heard and taken away, is that just being willing to fail. Because I think, I don't know if it's society or if it's our perception of society would say that failure is to be avoided, right? No, everybody likes a winner. Everyone wants to see the person on, the first step of the podium or the top step, and seeing a loser or see someone who's not proficient is like not exciting, right? It's not rewarded. It's not what we want, especially, I don't know if it's a Western thing or it's just a thing, but the reality is the truth is you have to be willing to be bad. You have to be willing to fail and recognize it as a gift. It's just a learning. Like you said, you don't want to just continue to fail at the same thing over and over again. Figure out why you're failing at that thing, improve upon it so that it doesn't happen. That's not a gift, to fail at the same thing over and over again. But the failure itself, the learning, the lesson, should be seen and taken could be seen and taken as a gift, right? As a step along the path to greatness.
Yeah, absolutely. You the only failure is the failure to learn. Yeah. And as long as you continue to learn from those failures, you will eventually kind of get to where you're going. And I think a lot of people don't look at the failure as a gift and a lesson. And then there's always the people who like to point fingers. And what I have found I stole this from somebody, and I don't remember who. Anything wise that I say, you can just assume that I stole it from somebody else.
Same.
And anything foolish I say is 100% me. But the individual, somewhere I read or heard on a podcast or something, somebody said that obviously the only failure is the failure to learn, but also you will never get criticism from somebody who's doing more than you. And I find that really interesting, because the people who are doing more than you have been in your shoes, and so they have empathy for your failures because they probably made those same failures or something close, right? You don't see Jeff Bezos making fun of Elon Musk very often, right? Even though there's a lot of, especially between the two of them, there's a lot of fertile ground for them to do that. You don't see Bill Gates making fun of Jeff Bezos, right? Yeah. You don't see that at that level. I have a friend who's got a very, very big podcast, guy named Patrick Bet-David, and I say things that are wrong all the time, and he'll every once in a while give me some constructive feedback, which I value a lot, but there's never criticism.
Yeah.
Because he knows what it takes to put yourself out there every single day and know you're going to make mistakes. And so when I see people pointing fingers and I see people criticizing, it's always somebody who's doing a lot less. And so obviously I have no respect for their criticism.
Right. Yeah. And what you said there, to kind of dovetail in another thought similarly though, is I think as people, we fear failure, but I think we more fear the judgment of others for that failure. And so to tie it into what you just said, that judgment is likely coming from someone that hasn't even achieved what you've been willing to attempt, right? Because like to draw another analogy to your Jeff Bezos thing, it'd be like Jeff Bezos making fun of a tech startup, a guy running a tech startup. Right. He's not going to do that
No.
Why would he? Right.
Right.
But he's certainly not going to. But someone that's starting a tech company likely is going to get made fun of by the guy or lady that's working at the manufacturing plant. Like, that's stupid, man. That's never going to work. Just come back and get on the line type of thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that either. But the idea being someone that's risking and pushing out there into some uncomfortable areas when they fail, criticisms are likely going to come from those that haven't walked their shoes, like you said. And so, but why would we care about that, right? But we do. I think we do as people more. We don't want to hear that judgment almost more than we don't want to experience the failure, right? We don't want to be told, that was a waste of time, man. You never should have had your eyes set on pararescue. The failure rate was really high. You should have had a plan B. We just don't want to hear that crap, right? I think, is my take on the failure / judgment of failure thing. But
well, sure. And say what you want about David Goggins, but he has actually brought to light something that was very prevalent within the special operations community, and that is basically other people's criticisms and failures became fuel for your fire. So when I was a pararescue instructor is a great example. My PJ students were all stronger, faster, and smarter than me. Why they would allow somebody like me to instruct them, I have no idea, but that's just the system. But I'll tell you, some of the fastest runs I've ever done in my life were when I was leading a bunch of PJ students, because I could suck up 10 pounds of pain in order to give them one. Right. And there's just something that's motivating about that. When people tell you can't do something, it's like, oh yeah. Watch this.
Right.
And maybe you fail at that, but at least you tried that. I was listening to a podcast. I think it was 30-minute or 20-minute VC, Harry Stebbins' podcast, where he was interviewing somebody from Sequoia, and the Sequoia investors said that they actually would no longer invest in startup founders that didn't have at least one failure under their belt. Yeah. Because so when I started a second company, I did things better than I did when I started the first. And as I start a third and a fourth, things are going to be done even better, and they're a lot more efficient because I've already made the mistakes. Right. I know not to waste a bunch of money on a sales guy in the beginning, because they're just going to sell you on giving them a salary, and you're just going to waste the money, right? I didn't know that in the beginning, and so that's what I did. I know not to outsource marketing. That marketing has to be in-house. I know not to outsource engineering. That for the most part, engineering has to be in-house. These are all things that I've learned the hard way. But they're also all things that people who'd gone before me could have told me. And that's why I think that when you see people who have done more than you, who've accomplished more in the same space, you're really going to find that they're going to be hungry to give you the leadership or the lessons that they wish that they had when they were in a leadership position in their new companies. Right
on. I want to move the ball forward a little bit, because I want to get to the stuff that and I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to get to the stuff that you're working on now around human trafficking. So, and the DeliverFund, so talk about the first time maybe you had exposure to human trafficking, and was it with the CIA, and when did that sort of mission in your life begin in terms of wanting to stem that, or wanting to get in the middle of that and disrupt it and have an impact?
Well, I saw human trafficking all the way back when I was in the Air Force. I can think of instances in Morocco, Kuwait, Turkey, a number of places where I actually saw human trafficking, but I didn't realize that's what it was. And then when I left the Air Force, was working in that private personnel recovery startup. I ended up working a personnel recovery case in conjunction with the FBI's Personnel Recovery Center. And where the FBI agent said this might be human trafficking. And that was really the first time I think I had actually heard the term in the proper context, right? The Air Force says you do these like computer-based training programs, which are complete crap, and talk about human trafficking or trafficking in persons. And it's really terrible. At least it was at the time. So that was the first time I'd really heard it. And it kind of piqued an interest, like, oh, that's interesting. What's that? I read a little bit about it, didn't really think too much of it, went into the Central Intelligence Agency. Again, didn't really think a whole lot about it until uh, I, I started kind of seeing it in more places. And because when you're in those types of countries, if you're paying attention, you know what you're looking for, you're going to see it. And I started seeing it in more places, and I started reading more about it. And then I remember the Taken movies had come out,
Mm-hmm.
and so people started talking about, like that was human trafficking, and so that made me look at it and start reading more about it. And I very quickly realized that is actually not what human trafficking looks like, not even close.
Right.
So I just kind of tend to be an academic nerd, and once I get interested in something, I really start diving into academic works on it. And then I was in southern Afghanistan and ended up working a joint case with somebody where there was what I like to call smoking gun human trafficking intel, and we started looking for like where do you send this information to, and we couldn't find a place, and that really lit a fire under me because it was this epiphany of like, wait a minute, we spend billions of dollars every single month fighting terrorism. We spend multiple billions every year fighting narcotics and fighting, the illicit sale of alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. And yet we don't have anybody doing anything about this human trafficking issue. Surely that can't be real. So I started asking around. I mean, all I knew was operators and intel people at that point in my life, and I couldn't find a single person who'd ever done anything on the human trafficking side. The closest I found was a former, or actually at the time, a current CIA analyst who was part of a defense program and was detailed over to the Department of Defense, and they were doing academic research around the human trafficking issue. And that was the closest I could find on anybody who'd ever really looked at it. And in the State Department had the Trafficking in Persons Office, but that's just a policy office. Like there was no version of Nic McKinley that was doing human trafficking related operations. And so I looked at possibly joining law enforcement. And I realized that even if I was a very good law enforcement officer, I would be just another cog in that machine. I mean, I understood how the government worked really well at that point. So I decided that I had the network, I had the contacts, I had the know-how. All I had to do was fund something to essentially be what is the equivalent of the counterterrorism center, but for human trafficking. And so I, in 2014, launched DeliverFund and left the CIA in March of 2015, and DeliverFund went operational in April of 2015.
And was the goal of DeliverFund then, I know I talked about it in the intro, providing data to law enforcement to enable them to do their job more effectively? Was that always sort of like where you were going to fit in the gap of how we're going to help solve this problem or fight this problem?
Yeah, it was always the goal. I had I knew that there was going to be a technological solution, mainly because that was the solution to narcotics and terrorism. So I figured there would have to be a technology solution. And when I started looking for technology solutions, I couldn't find any very robust ones that existed. There were these different people who, one came out of Y Combinator, one came out of Carnegie Mellon, one was funded by Ashton Kutcher, and they'd all done a decent job of trying to solve this problem. But one, you didn't have any technologists that were running these things. I think that was a problem too. Not a single one of these companies actually had somebody who had hunted people on the ground, like actually understood what was relevant and what was not relevant as far as data was concerned. And so we started with equipping, training, and advising local law enforcement, because that's the hard stop at the end of that road, and you need to make sure it's extremely robust. But that's also an R&D effort to figure out where the problems really exist and what needs to be automated and what data needs to be collected. And I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on technology from different vendors that all promised the world. And at the end of the day, I remember I got to the point where I would be on these demos with these tech vendors, and I would actually say, okay, great, run this phone number. and let me see what you have. And they would run the phone number and nothing would come back. I'd be like, okay, this is what comes back when I run it in another platform. And so we really started to understand what was marketing and what was real capability. And once we figured out that nobody had built anything that was really going to be helpful, especially at the strategic level, there were different tools that could be helpful at the tactical level for a very short period of time, but nothing that was helpful for long-term cases that did not require massive amounts of human input. And so everything was always focused around the analyst. Well, that's a very limited resource. We can't just have analysts continue to hunt down human traffickers. We need to find ways to incentivize and resource everybody to be able to get involved. And so that's really what we saw as the opportunity to fight human trafficking at the scale of the problem. Because a lot of people who are in the human trafficking space are very interested in fighting human trafficking, and that's great. I'm glad that they are. I'm not interested in fighting anything. I'm interested in winning. And so people get very married to the process and they lose sight of the outcome. So you get a bunch of former special operators who are like, oh, we're going to go do former special operator stuff in fighting human trafficking. It's like, great. You spent a lot of time and money and you got one trafficker, and that's awesome. I'm not right. trying to take that away from them, but for the same amount of time and money, we can resource hundreds of law enforcement officers across the entire United States simultaneously. We just have to use and learn some new skills. And so again, people not being willing to learn those new skills mean that they want to be involved in the process of fighting human trafficking as opposed to winning. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in winning the war on fighting human trafficking, not just on fighting it.
Right on. And the technology piece, it would seem that in our current technology, layered world, that we are so, we're so tied to technology that technology would seem to enable tech predators or predators to use that as a way to make their business more abundant, right? Have you seen that to be true? Again, you kind of grew up pre-internet, pre the iPhone, pre all that. And now post it, and so you've seen kind of both sides. Is it much more prevalent now? The human traffic, has it been? Is there sort of gas on the fire, given all the technology and the gaming and all these different ways that predators can kind of get access right into your living room or your kids' bedrooms by virtue of technology?
Yes, that's exactly what has happened. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is a great organization. They have the best data on child trafficking in the United States. And they found that they had an 846% increase in suspected child trafficking cases in just a 5-year period. And the reason for that is smartphones, broadband connected microcomputers that we give to children, and those which then gives them access to every single person in the world who also has access to a smartphone. Again, the world. Yeah. I mean, you and I could get on WeChat and start talking with somebody in China today. Yeah. And that was never possible before the smartphone. Yep. And the barrier to entry to do that is extremely low. So when we give children iPhones, well, the predators have iPhones or any type of smartphone. And so they just get on the same social media platforms, on the same gaming platforms. They're going to go where the kids are, and they start doing their process of manipulating and exploiting those children. When you look at human trafficking and you talk about human trafficking, most people think about stranger abductions, right? Yeah. It's the white van with free candy driving through the neighborhood. It's going to abduct the kid. And not that those things don't happen, but again, when you look at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's data on missing kids, they find that 0.0001% of those of their missing children cases are stranger abductions. So to kind of put that in plain English, it means that a child in the United States has roughly the same chance of getting struck by lightning as they do being abducted by a stranger. However, looking at that same data, you find that 92% of those of their missing kid cases are what they call endangered runaways. which is a fancy way for saying there was a child who was most likely contacted on the internet and manipulated and groomed into running away into the arms of a predator, thinking that that predator was somebody who was going to solve all their problems and, you know, shower them with gifts and love and all kinds of things. Right. So that's the real problem. And the reason why you have all these endangered runaways and this huge uptick is because of smartphones. We gave every predator in the world access to every child in the world, which pre-internet was something that never could have happened.
Right. Yep. And the technology too. So I have a friend who's a friend of his, fell prey to, I think, what's become known as kind of a common, or I say common, but something that's known about, it would be called phishing, but basically access the child through a teenager through smartphone. Hey, we met at a party, sort of pretend like they've met, convince the person, the teenager, to do something, to convince them that they do know them. Maybe they just don't remember them. Get them to do something inappropriate, like a sexting type of thing, and then spring the hook and go, okay, now we need money. I've videotaped all this stuff that you did, and we're going to show your family. And actually, in this case, my friend's son committed suicide over it, right? And it was on national news and things like that. And so there's the idea of snatching or using technology to get a child to approach somebody they think is a friend, and then they end up getting abducted and that, but it's also using it to harm them without ever seeing them, right? I mean, there's that wouldn't really, I guess, fall into the category of trafficking, but it certainly is.
It's sextortion.
Sextortion.
And it often will lead to trafficking, and in many ways, because, you know, what's being done through sextortion, I believe, is human trafficking, just because when you look at the law says essentially, and I'm going to really paraphrase the whole thing, that when somebody either forces, defrauds, or coerces somebody into doing something for the economic benefit of somebody else, like that is human trafficking. And so when you have what happened to your friend's son, that is, you know, by the academic definition, not necessarily the legal definition, right? But by the academic definition, I believe that's human trafficking. They're trafficking that person, in this case, maybe just their images and their pride, or you know, whatever it is. But there definitely is an economic benefit to the person who's sextorting them, but that's a great example of how that was never possible pre-smartphone, pre-internet.
Right.
And now, or if it was extremely rare. And now it unfortunately is becoming quite common.
And what you said a minute ago, Nick, around, you know, we give our kids these devices, and I'm a big, you know, I've said it before on the show, this idea that we give our kids these phones and then we ask them to make good choices is just in lunacy to me, right? Now I will agree that technology is not inherently bad, because technology brought you and I together. It allows this whole thing to happen. It's no different than, you know, a gun can be used for good or bad. A hammer can be used to build or to kill. It's not the tool that's bad, but at the same time, you don't give the keys to a Ferrari to your hadn't learned to drive yet kid and say, "Hey, make good choices." Right? It needs to be managed. Do you have any thoughts on recommendations, things that you would say a parent needs to be aware of, or to do? Things that they would put in place to help protect their kiddo? Any thoughts there?
The only way to protect your child is to have a relationship with them where they feel confident telling you if they've done something wrong, right? So, and you're, I mean, that's and letting them know what the dangers are, right? Not talking about the dangers of sextortion, not talking about these different things is not sticking our head in the sand is not a way to deal with it. We need to talk to children about it. We need to help them understand what the consequences of those types of actions are, and that we are there to be a resource with them. I mean, it would be the same as when parents are like, "Oh, it's not my kid."
Yeah.
First question I ask them is, "Have you talked to your children about drugs?" Well, of course. Well, why? If not your kid. Well, because my kids will be exposed to drugs at some point in their life.
Right.
Okay, awesome. So you talk to them about it. The chances of them being exposed to a predator online are infinitely higher than the chances of your children being exposed to, especially hard drugs.
Yeah.
So you need to understand that the device itself, yes, it is neutral, and yes, it can do a lot of good and be used for a lot of good, but also life-destroying decisions can come from it. And you need to educate your children about what those decisions are. And then also just not be lazy.
Yeah.
There's so many parents who just give the phone to their child because their child wants it, and it's a free babysitter, and then their child is all over Instagram or TikTok or, pick a social media platform. And now all of a sudden their child has like massive raging anxiety. It's like, well, every study that's ever been done ever about children and the use of social media shows that social media use, especially among preteen and teen girls, leads to anxiety every single time. So why do you think it's going to be any different with your child? Now, at the same time, parents can go too far the other direction and say, oh, well, I'm just not going to give my child any access to a phone or to social media in general. Well, that also doesn't work because now they're not learning how to make good decisions around those types of things. So we at DeliverFund actually created an app. You can go to the App Store and download it just by searching DeliverFund. And what it does is it gives parents and really anybody who wants to use it access to our red light data. And that red light data is data that is a direct association with commercial sex advertising. So most of your human trafficking that happens in the United States is commercial sex in nature. And most of that happens through online, like they actually advertise these girls. They advertise them as, escorts, prostitutes, whatever, but we all know what it really is. And so we actually collect that information and then make it queryable so that parents can say, okay, wait a minute, this person has been, DMing on Instagram with my child, and they say they're the 16-year-old boy, but they just gave them a phone number and told them to hit them up on WhatsApp, right? So that's red flag number one. And I ran that phone number through DeliverFund's app, and it came back as a positive hit to a commercial sex advertisement. Well, that doesn't mean that that's a human trafficker. That doesn't mean that that is an active commercial sex advertisement. But what it does mean is that that phone number is present on a commercial sex advertisement. Full stop. That is 100% true. So if that's true, that's your first indicator that you've got a potential problem and you need to do some investigating and figuring out whether or not this is a safe person for your child to be talking to.
Wow. It's awesome. I want to look to wrap up. A couple things kind of come to mind that I want to make sure to ask. It seems like the idea of human trafficking and sex trafficking has gotten very kind of top of mind and prevalent and being talked about much more, I would say, this year and recently than even in 2 or 3 years ago. I would think that that's a good thing. Is that, in your view, is that a good thing, or could it maybe be something else? I don't know. I mean, it just seems interesting to me that there's a lot of people piling onto this topic, and I'm always questioning on where those motivations come from sometimes.
So I think it's a good thing as long as we're having the right conversation. Most of the uptick in the talk about human trafficking has come from the movie Sound of Freedom, which I haven't seen the movie, so I'm not really going to opine on that, but I'm relatively familiar with the narrative, and the narrative of that movie is very relevant to parents who live in Guatemala and Colombia, Venezuela, South America, Mexico, right? Developing world countries. If you live in the United States of America, that narrative is not really that relevant to you. You're not going to drop your kid off at ice skating lessons and your child's going to be trafficked. I mean, that's not the predominant form of trafficking. Predominant form is online manipulation. And so that's the thing that we need parents to really focus on, and children, and especially teenage girls really to focus on is It's not a zip tie on your car door handle. Like, that's not real. That's a total conspiracy theory. It's not any of those types of things. It's somebody sliding into your DMs and suddenly being the answer to all of your problems and convincing you to run away from your support network into their arms so they can become your support network. And you're going to owe them for that. And they're going to traffic you in order to get their payment. So I think when we look at, the drive of the conversation around human trafficking is good. I'm glad that people are paying attention to it. But let's start paying attention to the right part of human trafficking that is relevant to parents in the United States. And that is the online commercial sex trafficking and the recruitment of predominantly teenage girls and preteens, even though there is some boys as well. The predominance is getting access to those children online and then exploiting them through the internet.
Fantastic. Where can people find you? How do they get involved? How, if they have a heart for helping on this mission, where do they connect with you, and how do they get involved in helping you on your projects?
So you can connect with me at Nic McKinley. That's NICMcKinley.com. And then there's links to everything you kind of want there. And then you can get involved with DeliverFund at deliverfund.org. That's DELIVER, as in deliver a box, deliverfund.org. You can find DeliverFund on all the social media platforms at DeliverFund, and you can find me at the social media platforms at the.nic.mckinley, even though Instagram and LinkedIn are pretty much the only two I pay attention to.
Got it. Okay. Awesome, man. I think we could go for another couple hours, but I do want to respect your time, and I so appreciate you sharing everything that you did. Such an important mission, and I'm just thrilled that you're able to share your story on the show, and I so appreciate your time for it, Nic.
Well, thank you for having me and helping us spread the word. Absolutely.
To our audience, thank you for taking time from your day to listen to the show. If you would share the program with a friend, write a rating or write a review, I always get that mixed up, and give us a rating. I would so appreciate it, as it helps us reach a broader audience. Until next time, friends, I'm Eric Sardina. You've been listening to the Return to Authenticity podcast, and bye for now.